Tonight's story hides a secret the Wild West tried to bury for centuries. Imagine this, an Apache woman fighting for her last breath in a deadly blizzard, her body frozen, her heartbeat fading, until suddenly she wakes up. But not in the snow, not with her tribe. She opens her eyes in the warm bed of a quiet cowboy she's never seen before. Who is he? Why did he risk his life to save hers? And what danger was chasing her through that storm? Before we begin, hit subscribe, share this video, and drop a comment telling us what moment you're expecting the most. Now let's begin a story you will never forget. The wind screamed across the frozen plains like a wounded spirit, dragging sheets of snow that cut against the skin like tiny blades. In the middle of that brutal storm, an Apache woman staggered forward, her breath shallow, her steps unsteady. Her name was Neil, Wind, though the winter wind tonight seemed determined to erase her from existence. She wrapped her thin shawl tighter, but the cold broke through every layer as if it knew her bones by name. Each exhale trembled in the air, her vision blurring as she fought to keep moving through an endless white void. Snow hammered down from the heavens, blinding, merciless, as if the sky itself wanted her gone. Her tribe had moved south toward safer ground, but Neil had been separated in the confusion of the storm. She had tried to find the trail, tried to follow the sound of hooves and voices, but the blizzard swallowed everything. Now she wandered through silence so thick it pressed against her chest. She told herself she had survived winters worse than this, but soon even lies felt too heavy to carry. Her knees buckled, and she stumbled but forced herself up again. Her fingers had gone numb first, then her arms, then her legs. A frightening calm washed over her, the kind people feel moments before sleep or death, sometimes both. She clutched the small leather pouch at her side, the last possession she truly valued, though she could not remember why in the fading blur of her thoughts. A tear froze on her cheek before it had the chance to fall. She whispered her brother's name, hoping anyone would hear her. But only the wind answered, cold and indifferent. Her strength left her, slipping away quietly like a candle burning its final inch. She took one more step, then another, and then she dropped to her knees as the storm swirled around her. The world spun slowly, the snowflakes turning into bright stars. Her eyes grew heavy, her breath shallow and slow. She felt her body sinking, her heat pouring into the snow. And then the darkness welcomed her with open arms. She collapsed face first into the drifts, the storm burying her inch by inch, until she looked like part of the land itself. When dawn finally arrived, the plains lay still beneath a quiet blanket of white. The storm had passed, leaving behind an eerie silence, the kind that came only after nature had claimed its due. Everett Lane rode out early that morning, his horse Cruncher stepping carefully over frozen ground. Everett was not a man who expected surprises. He lived alone, kept to himself, tended his cattle, and spoke only when necessary. But as he rode along the ridge, he noticed something unusual, a dark shape half buried in the snow. Everett slowed his horse, squinting against the glare. At first he thought it might be a dead calf or some lost bundle discarded during the storm. But the closer he got, the more he realized the shape was too delicate, too human. His stomach tightened as he slid off his horse and hurried forward. When he brushed away the frozen layer of snow, a face emerged, peaceful, still, and frighteningly pale. Her cheeks were ice cold, her hair stiff with frost. But Everett had learned long ago never to trust what the cold made things look like. He lifted her wrist and pressed 2 fingers to her skin. Nothing. He waited, still nothing. Then just when he was sure she had already crossed that line between this world and the next, he felt the faintest flutter, so small it almost wasn't there. Everett's breath caught. She was alive. Barely, but alive. He wrapped his coat around her trembling body and lifted her into his arms, surprised at how light she was, like a small bird frozen mid-flight. He mounted his horse with difficulty, holding her tight against his chest to share every bit of warmth he could. Cruncher galloped hard through the snow, the cold wind slicing against Everett's face. He leaned forward, whispering reassurances to the horse, even though his own heart pounded with uncertainty. He didn't know the woman, didn't know where she came from, didn't know what would happen if she died in his care. But none of it mattered. She was alive, and that was enough. They reached his cabin, a small wooden structure nestled between 2 rocky outcroppings. Everett kicked the door open with his boot and carried her inside, the heat of the fireplace barely warming the room. He laid her gently on his bed, then hurried to light more firewood, throwing in logs until the flames roared. He stripped off her wet clothes carefully, respectfully, wrapping her in every blanket he owned. Her skin was icy and rigid, but gradually her color shifted from the deadly blue of frostbite to something faintly, desperately alive. Everett heated water and pressed warm cloths against her arms and legs, rubbing gently to coax life back into her limbs. The fire crackled loudly in the silence, filling the small cabin with flickers of orange light. Hours passed. Everett stayed beside her, wiping her face, warming her hands, listening for every small, fragile breath. The storm outside had quieted, but his heartbeat hadn't. He watched her eyelids twitch, watched her lips tremble with faint, weak breaths. He didn't know anything about her tribe, her family, or her story, but he could see enough. She was strong, stronger than most people who'd collapse in such weather. Her chest rose irregularly, but it rose. And that was all Everett needed to keep working. At last, when the sun began to sink beyond the ridge and painted the snow-covered plains with red light, Neil's fingers twitched. Everett froze, watching closely. Her hand shifted beneath the blankets, small movements at first, then slightly more. Her eyelashes fluttered as if they weighed 100 pounds. She inhaled sharply, a sudden painful breath that startled Everett. Her eyes opened slowly, dark and disoriented, scanning the room without understanding. She blinked several times, confused by the warm glow, the cabin walls, and the man sitting beside her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She tried to sit up, but the sudden movement sent pain through her body, and she gasped. Everett reached out instinctively, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. She stared at him, fear filling her eyes. She remembered nothing of being rescued, nothing of the storm breaking, nothing of losing consciousness. All she knew was that she had woken in a stranger's bed, covered in blankets, with a cowboy watching over her. Everett lifted his hands slowly to show he meant no harm. Neil tried to speak, but her lips were too dry, her throat too raw. Everett poured warm water into a tin cup and held it for her. She hesitated, her eyes flicking between the cup and his face, but her body needed the warmth. She took a small sip, then another, feeling life return to her. Her voice cracked when she finally whispered a single word, her name, Neil. Everett repeated it softly, making sure he pronounced it right. She studied him with caution, searching for danger, but all she saw was concern written in the lines of his tired face. Everett pointed toward the window where snow still lay deep outside. He tried to explain with simple words, storm, collapse, freezing. She listened silently, then lowered her gaze. A memory flashed across her mind, the blizzard, the disorientation, the moment she fell. She closed her eyes, grateful yet overwhelmed. Everett stepped back to give her space, but she reached out weakly, stopping him long enough to whisper a soft thank you. Her voice trembled, not just from weakness, but from the weight of understanding that this stranger had saved her life. The room grew quiet again, broken only by the crackling fire and the distant wind brushing against the cabin walls. Night approached slowly, and Neil tried to rest, though her mind remained restless. She watched the cowboy move around the cabin, preparing food, checking the fire, making sure she was warm. His movements were calm, steady, almost gentle. She had met many settlers before, some kind, some cruel, some dangerous. But this man was different. There was no expectation in his eyes, no judgment, only a quiet duty he didn't need to explain. Everett placed a small bowl of warm broth near her, unsure if she was strong enough to eat. She lifted the spoon with shaky hands, spilling some on the blanket, but he didn't step in or correct her. He let her struggle, knowing dignity mattered, even for someone who was barely clinging to life. She ate slowly, each mouthful rekindling her strength. When she finished, exhaustion swept over her again. Everett adjusted the blankets and dimmed the lamp, letting the fire's soft glow illuminate the room. As she drifted into sleep, Neil realized something surprising. She felt safe, truly safe, for the first time since the storm. She listened to the soft sounds of Everett tending the fire, the calm rhythm of his footsteps. Outside, the winter night grew colder, sharper, more unforgiving, but inside this small cabin warmth wrapped around her like a promise. She closed her eyes, not in fear this time, but in fragile peace. And just before sleep claimed her, she wondered why fate had led her to the bed of a quiet cowboy in the middle of nowhere. The fire crackled into the night. Everett sat in the only chair, watching over her, long after she had fallen asleep. He didn't know her story yet, didn't know the danger she might be running from, or the people who might be searching for her. But something in the way she slept, something fragile yet fierce in the shape of her expression, told him their paths had crossed for a reason. And somewhere deep in the night, with the snow shimmering silver under the moonlight, Everett Lane realized this was no ordinary winter rescue. This was the beginning of something far more unexpected. The next morning brought a quiet brightness, the kind that made the snow outside look like a sea of diamonds. Neil woke slowly, her strength returning in small breaths. Everett was already awake, sitting near the window as he sharpened a small knife, not with the intent of intimidation, but with the calm rhythm of a man who lived in silence. When he noticed her stirring, he put the blade down gently and approached with warm water. She accepted it, her eyes softening with trust that hadn't been there the night before. As her strength grew, so did the weight of her memories. She told Everett in broken English and gestures how she had been separated from her people during the storm. She explained about the path south, the confusion, the fear, and how she had wandered blind through the storm until her body surrendered. Everett listened without interruption, leaning forward slightly, absorbing every word. He didn't judge her, didn't question her decisions. He simply nodded, understanding that survival often left no time for explanations. When she finished, she hesitated before asking the question that had been burning inside her since she woke. How far was her tribe now? Everett looked outside, studying the sky, the direction of the wind, the tracks left behind. He estimated the distance, days of travel through dangerous winter terrain, too far for her current condition. Her shoulders dropped slightly, not in despair, but in acceptance of the reality she already knew. Everett placed a gentle hand on the table beside her, close enough to reassure, distant enough to respect. For the rest of the day, Everett prepared the supplies she would eventually need: dried meat, warm clothing, a sturdy blanket. Neil watched him work, seeing kindness not born from duty, but from something deeper. A quiet connection grew between them, unspoken, fragile, but undeniably real. When night arrived, she stood at the doorway, wrapped in Everett's coat, gazing at the moonlit snow. Everett joined her, their breaths forming small clouds in the cold air. She turned to him and whispered her final words of gratitude, knowing no language could fully express what he had given her, a chance at life. Everett nodded, his eyes reflecting the same unspoken feeling. The next morning, when she rode away to find her people, she looked back only once. Everett stood in the doorway, watching her with the steady heart of a man who knew he'd remember this winter forever. And Neil carried his warmth with her, long after the snow melted.